Our next scripture reading is from the New Testament, Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. After he agreed with the workers to pay them a denarius, he sent them into his vineyard. Then he went out around 9 in the morning and saw others standing around the marketplace doing nothing. He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right." And they went. Again around noon, and then 3 in the afternoon, he did the same thing. Around 5 in the afternoon, he went and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you just standing around here doing nothing all day long?" "Because nobody has hired us," they replied. He responded, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the workers and give them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and moving on finally to the first." When those who were hired at 5 in the afternoon came, each one received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they grumbled against the landowner. "Those who were hired last worked 1 hour and would receive the same pay as we did, even though we had to work the whole day in the hot sun." But he said to them, "Friends, I did you no wrong. Didn't I agree to pay you a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I want to give to this one who was hired last, the same as I give to you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with what belongs to me? Or are you resentful because I'm generous? So those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last."
Right. Right here, tickling that. My brother is almost 4 years older than me, but as kids growing up, I didn't think that that meant that he should get more dinner or more dessert than me. He and I used to complain anytime either of us thought the other got a bigger portion. My mom finally got smart and decided that one of us would cut and serve the pieces and the other one had to choose. Of course, we had to take out the measuring tape and each time we cut, it shows not just the ruler of inches, but down to the millimeter to make sure that each piece was equal. It's the only way to be fair about it. Even adults want equality. We campaign and work for equal rights, equal pay for doing the same job, equal access to housing, and equal protection under the law. We take offense if we find someone is not treated in the same way as another. In today's world, those first workers from the parable we just heard would have probably reported the vineyard owner for unfair employment practices. We are a society that believes in equality and fairness, even though that is a rare thing to find. In today's parable, we see the vineyard owner going several times during the day to the marketplace to hire workers. Today, we might call them day laborers. Even though the landowner hires them at different times during the day, at the end of the day, he pays each of them the same wage. That is not fair. In our capitalist Western mindset, we may want to side with those who were hired first thing in the morning and agree that they should be paid more because they worked more hours all day long. The last ones hired worked only an hour and got paid the exact same wage for the day. How is that fair? Equality, justice, and fairness are often talked about in the same breath. And we have come to accept that what is just is also fair, and that to be seen as fair, we must also be just. However, all justice is not fair. And all that is fair is not just. Like most of his parables, Jesus uses common and everyday things that people would relate to or understand. Even today, we fully understand what it would feel like to work for 8 hours and be paid the same as the person next to us who only worked 1 hour. We agree that isn't a fair business practice. However, when we think of this story as a metaphor for the kingdom of heaven, I don't think any of us would say it's unfair for someone who comes to know and follow the way of Jesus at the age of 40 has any less standing in the kingdom than one of us who has believed in Jesus for our entire lives. In that sense, I think this parable is a bit lost on us, because it's easy to celebrate anyone who comes to follow Jesus at any point in their life. Somehow we care a lot more about fairness with worldly things, like money or cake, or any number of other things, than we do with the kingdom of heaven. All are welcome anytime into the kingdom of God. Just don't swoop in here on earth and get something handed to you easier than I got. For instance, a family in a foreign land goes through all the legal channels of coming to the United States. But another family who maybe can't afford legal help or is just so scared for their lives that they risk everything to sneak over the border and enter the US illegally. I've heard some immigrants bemoaning how unfair it is to them that the others came illegally while their family toiled to do things the right way. And maybe that's true. Maybe that is unfair to them. Or what about all the people who took out loans to go to college and then paid off their student loans after graduating? And now there are millions of students who might receive forgiveness from their student loans. Is that fair? I've seen plenty of people complaining online that it isn't fair to them and therefore should not happen. There are so many ways that we find ourselves saying how unfair something is. Sometimes even when we are the one who gets the better deal. We may feel badly because it wasn't fair that we got something great handed to us. The person next to us didn't. Maybe the day laborer who worked 1 hour felt that way when they saw the one who worked all day long with the same pay as them. Maybe they felt badly for the other. We don't know. We aren't told how they respond. When I was 19, I was engaged to someone I thought was a nice Christian guy. I became pregnant and he left the picture. I conceived without trying and at a time when I was not yet ready for a family. That year, my much older aunt also became pregnant after several attempts at a second child. She had several miscarriages and finally became pregnant, only to lose her daughter at about 32 weeks. The heartbeat stopped and she had to deliver a stillborn child. I remember being so sad for her and feeling so terribly guilty that I was given a beautiful, healthy daughter out of wedlock without trying or even wanting to get pregnant at that time. And there my aunt was, devastated by another traumatic loss of a child she so desperately wanted. That is not fair. And I knew it. She was nothing but gracious and loving and supportive of me. I cried out to God, asking why. There is no answer to that question. I can only imagine how it must have felt if she also cried out to God with that question, only to hear the words of the landowner. Are you resentful because I'm generous? Maybe when we see God being generous to someone else, we behave like the people who worked all day and wonder why God has not shown us the same generosity. But the thing is, when it comes to this parable, I think maybe we focus too much on the laborers, when what we're supposed to focus on is how to emulate the landowner. I literally looked at over 20 translations of the Bible, and every single one that added a heading to the passage called attention to the workers. In the Common English Bible, it says parable of the workers, for instance. In the NRSV, the laborers in the vineyard. But friends, I would argue that this text would more aptly be called parable of the landowner's generosity. That is where our focus needs to be. Jesus taught earlier in Matthew 13:52, therefore, every legal expert who has been trained as a disciple for the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings old and new things out of their treasure chests. The word translated here is head of household, like goddess, like that is the same word translated as landowner. So the legal experts trained as disciples, i.e. Jesus' disciples, are expected to be like landowners, i.e. God in this story, who generously provides for all. The landowner is who this parable is about. He is the one to model ourselves after. We hear the complaints of the workers, and we can relate to their feelings of what's fair and what isn't. But the story isn't even really about them. And that's not where our gaze should be. Rather, Jesus is speaking this parable to highlight the generosity of God as the ultimate landowner. God will use what has always belonged to the Creator for the good of all, even if humans fail to see that what may not seem fair is indeed what is just. Recall Jesus's earlier words in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and 45. You have heard that it was said, you must love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who harass you, so that you will be acting as children of your Father who is in heaven. He makes the sun rise on both the evil and the good, and sends rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous. God's love is outlandish and generous and unfair, and we are told to follow suit. The kingdom of heaven is likened to a generous landowner who gives each person what they need to live. It's not some place in the clouds that we will go one day when we die. It is the now and not yet kingdom that we are called to live into here and now. The parable teaches of a different kind of kingdom where there's enough work for everyone and each person gets a living wage. People get what they need no matter how long they work, no matter how little they work. And this is a picture of justice. So those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last. Jesus uses this phrase in a couple of other parables in the Gospels. In using this phrase, Jesus brings hope to all people, but especially the poor and the marginalized. He's letting them know that possessions and status are irrelevant in the kingdom of heaven. The economics of the kingdom of heaven are nothing like our worldly economy. What is just might not always be what is fair, but it is always what is righteous. It is always generous. The parable of the landowner is a story about a frivolous God who doesn't weigh costs and benefits. God instead makes decisions based on love. In the kingdom of heaven, the only law is generous love, given to all equally. This parable about the kingdom is an invitation for us to be part of this trait of generosity, to live as the first will be last and the last shall be first, to engage in the kingdom that is turned upside down. May we be a people who seek to be like God, the landowner, offering to all generously and frivolously, offering others what they need, not what they deserve. Ignoring the economics of the world and focusing instead on the crazy, generous economics of Jesus. Bringing the upside down kingdom of heaven just a little closer to now.